Alright, y'all, so before I get started, I just wanted to say very quickly that this video, along with another video on this topic of Black Greek mythology, will be the last of this series. And series is like the Achilles series that was intended to be in this series will be saved for a later date. But anyway, just getting back to the main subject of this video, there are probably some people right now who are a bit perplexed at the title of this video and even the premise that I'm broaching about Zeus being a black man, or a so-called black man. What I will say is that the character of Zeus, like all other characters in Greek mythology, have various iterations and interpretations of how they were portrayed over the course of time. Now, as I've already stated, the original portrayal of these figures were as so-called black people. That fact doesn't change, but nonetheless, the depictions of a Caucasian Zeus did in fact exist in the ancient world, especially subsequent to the Macedonian takeover of Greece. Case in point, when Alexander the Great, or the Macedonians' friend, Lysimachus, who was the king of Thrace, Asia Minor, and Macedon, depicted him on a coin as the son of an Egyptian so-called god by the name of Amun. Amun was basically the equivalent of Zeus, so he, Alexander, was regarded as the son of Zeus amongst the Greeks, particularly the Macedonian Greeks, who worshipped Alexander like a god. And of course, Alexander, being a Caucasian himself and being depicted as the son of Zeus, is what started the more quote-unquote Caucasoid appearance of not only the Greek gods, but a lot of the other gods that the other nations worshipped, such as the ancient Egyptian gods and goddesses, along with other nations who were conquered by Alexander and his retinue. But that will be something that I will talk about in a much later series down the line on Alexander and his conquest of most of the known world, because it had reverberations for close to 1,000 years all over the world. But anyway, just getting back to Zeus. Zeus during antiquity was referred to as Zeus Aethiops. Okay, Zeus Aethiops was one of the epithets that was applied to Zeus, particularly by the people who derived from the Greek island of Chios. Now, Chios is an island just off the western coast of Turkey in the Aegean Sea, near eastern Greece. And it's a pretty large island. I believe it's like the 5th biggest island in all of Greece. However, the most interesting thing about the island of Chios is that it is the island that the legendary Greek poet Homer was said to have come from. And at the very least, Homer came from Ionia, which could also be an implication that he was in fact from Chios, due to Chios being conquered by the Hellenic tribe known as the Ionians, who I will be touching on briefly in this video. But their conquering of Chios made it one of the 12 member states of the Ionian League. Okay, but anyway, according to figures like Pindar, who was a Greek poet himself, Homer was in fact from the island of Chios, where once again Zeus was said to have been worshipped under the name of Aethiops. Now, anybody who's ever studied the ancient Greeks and their language knows that one of the words that they would use to indicate that someone was what we would call today quote-unquote black or a Negro was Aethiops. And in one of Homer's central poems, the Iliad, Zeus was one of the more featured characters in this narrative. So as we're about to see, the question that begs to be asked is, was the portrayal of Zeus that Homer worshipped, the one that he included in his Iliad, really a so-called Aethiops or Negro, just as he's portrayed in certain relatively recent adaptations of the Trojan War, such as the TV show Troy Fall of a City, where there was a lot of controversy surrounding the show's portrayal of Zeus as a so-called black man? Was this really as ludicrous and controversial as people tried to make it out to be? Or was this an accurate portrayal of Homer's Zeus as he was depicted on the island that he was born on, Chios, where once again Zeus was indeed referred to as Zeus Aethiops, or Zeus the Black? But before we get into that, I just want to prove that Homer was in fact from the island that Zeus was referred to as Aethiops on. Now, the facts about Homer's life are relatively shadowy at best. Not much is known about him other than the fact that he was the author of 2 of the most well-known pieces of literature ever, and even that is somewhat disputed. But nonetheless, it's still worth looking into so that the connection can be made between Homer and the Zeus that he venerated under the epithet of Aethiops, or the Black, on once again the island of Chios. And this is an important understanding to have, because it not only acts as confirmation that not only were the ancient Greek gods and goddesses originally depicted as so-called black, but also the aboriginal people of Greece at least before the Macedonian takeover, were indeed black people as well, and the portrayals of their deities was meant to act as a representation of what they looked like as a people. But once again, that topic will be addressed in a far greater in-depth video on the ancient Greeks and who they actually were and what they actually looked like. But anyway, so we're going to delve relatively deeply into Homer's origins that were at least allegedly rooted in the island of Chios, and then the origins of the island of Chios itself, and then its first inhabitants and what they looked like all the way up to the people who Homer is identified with, that being the Ionians. Now, as I've already stated, there are a lot of inconclusive facts about Homer's life, and there are even questions if he even existed, let alone where his birthplace was. But the evidence that is available to us points to the likelihood that he was indeed from the Greek island of Chios. Various ancient Greek poets such as Simonides of Amargos, the Greek historian Ephorus, if I'm not mistaken, and Pindar, they've all attested to the birthplace of Homer being Chios. But perhaps the most famous declaration that has been made regarding Homer's hometown being Chios was from Homer himself in his hymn to Apollo, where he refers to himself as a blind man that dwells in rocky Chios. So now let's take a look at this declaration that was made by Homer. All right, so now this is one of the Homeric hymns. This is one of the collection of hymns that are attributed to Homer. This is the hymn to Apollo, and there has been some controversy over the course of time of over whether or not Homer was the actual author of these hymns. I believe it's like a 34. It's a collection of 34 hymns or poems written to a myriad of people, and of course to a lot of the gods too, such as Apollo. Like this one is written to Apollo, and I believe another one's written to Demeter, and a few other so-called Greek gods. But the authorship has traditionally been attributed to Homer by many ancient Greek historians, such as Thucydides, who have stated that Homer is the author of these Homeric hymns, which is why they have their name, the Homeric hymns. But the mystery of the authorship of these hymns is just yet another branch of what's known as the Homeric question. So we may never know who it was that wrote these poems, and even most of the literary work that is attributed to Homer, because you have some people who state that most of Homer's literary works weren't just written by one person, but a collective of people, and we're going to see who those people are in a little bit. But from what we can see that's been documented by, once again, ancient Greek historians such as Thucydides, these poems were in fact written by Homer. So we're just going to have to go off of the information that we have. But anyway, let's just take a look at this hymn real quick and see what it says right here. So I'm going to start at the top. So, and now may Apollo be favorable, and Artemis, and farewell all you maidens. Remember me in after time, whenever any one of men on earth, a stranger who has seen and suffered much, comes here and asks of you, whom think ye girls is the sweetest singer that comes here, and in whom do you most delight? Then answer, each and all with one voice, he is a blind man and dwells in rocky Chios. His lays are evermore supreme. As for me, I will carry your renown as far as I roam over the earth to the well-placed cities of man, and they will also believe also, for indeed this thing is true. And I will never cease to praise far-shooting Apollo, god of the silver bow, whom rich-haired Leto bare. So, as we can see here, it states that, or at least in a line, I believe it's 172, the person who wrote this, which once again has been attributed traditionally to Homer, he states that he is a blind man and dwells in rocky Chios. All right, so and we can see here that he's referring to himself in the beginning when he states remember me. So when he states remember me, when he speaks to the maidens who he's talking to, or the women who he's talking to, he tells them to respond to the men who asks, who is the sweetest singer who comes here, and whom do you most delight? And then they of course respond with the quote that he is a blind man and dwells in rocky Chios. Okay, so now it's been stated historically that Homer was known for being blind. Okay, and obviously in this poem, Homer mentions that he is a blind, or at least allegedly, Homer mentions that he is a blind man from rocky Chios. Okay, so this could act as an indicator that this was indeed Homer who wrote this poem, because once again, traditionally, Homer has always been regarded as a quote unquote blind man, or somebody who was blind, as it states in this poem. So now let's move on. Now, another indicator that Homer was in fact from the island of Chios was the existence of a clan that hailed from Chios who called themselves the Homeridae, or the Homerids. And their name quite literally means, or quite literally meant, the children of Homer. And their existence is a historical fact attested to by many. So that also lends credence to Homer's existence as well, or at least in my opinion, it leads credence to Homer's existence as well, even though there are people who question whether or not they were called the Homeridae because they were originally said to be the descendants of Homer. But once again, the speculation of Homer's existence does loom over their claims to being Homer's kindred, but their belief that they were descendants of Homer obviously indicate, at least to me, that they must have been his progeny and that Homer must have existed as a result of this. So let's read real quick a little bit about the Homeridae. All right, so now let's just read this Perdicana article on the Homeridae. So Homerids, Latin Homeridae, Greek Homerida, a historical clan on the Aegean island of Chios whose members claim to be descendants of the ancient Greek poet Homer. They claim to have brought the Iliad and Odyssey attributed to him from Ionia to the Greek mainland as early as the 6th century BC. They may have preserved texts of poems ascribed to Homer. Originally, they were rhapsodists, singer-reciters of Homeric epics. Authorship of a few Homeric hymns, preludes, and mythical tales of the gods has been attributed to them. From the 4th century BC onward, the Greek word Homeridae became also a common noun used to designate rhapsodists and Homeric scholars in general. So this is just a brief little synopsis on who the Homeridae were, and as it states right here in the beginning of this paragraph, they were in fact a historical clan that came from the island of Chios, and they did indeed claim to be descendants of the ancient Greek poet Homer. Okay, so let's just read a few more ancient Greek sources that attest to the existence of the Homeridae real quick. So now we're just going to read a few sources, a few ancient Greek sources that attest to the historical existence of the Homeridae. So now let's start from the top right here. So evidence on the Homeridae relates to the late 6th, 5th, and 4th centuries BC, after which nothing more is heard of them. The first commentary mention of this group, or contemporary mention of this group, is in a poem of about 485 BC by Pindar. So let's read what Pindar has to say. So in the same way as the Homeridae, singers of stitched words usually begin with an address to Zeus. So this is the ancient Greek poet Pindar, who attests to the Homeridae and how they would sing to Zeus. So just as we just read in the Perdicana article, the Homeridae were rhapsodists, or singers that would recite poems or songs that were most likely written by Homer, who they once again claimed ancestry from, and they would sing these various poems and songs to their gods. As it states right here, they were singing to Zeus. They would begin their songs with an address to Zeus, and one has to speculate whether or not this is the same exact Zeus that we're trying to look into, that being the Zeus that was referred to as Aethiops Zeus, or Zeus Aethiops, who once again was referred to as Zeus Aethiops on the island of Chios, the same exact island that the Homeridae come from. But let's read a few more, or a couple more ancient Greek sources about the Homeridae. Up here where it says later. So later contemporary references come in 4th century texts in the works of Plato and Isocrates. In one of his essays written around 350 BC, Isocrates says, some of the Homeridae tell the story that Helen appeared to Homer in a dream and told him to make a poem about the Trojan expedition. So this is Isocrates, the ancient Greek orator or speaker, who is giving an account of the Homeridae and how the Homeridae would tell the story, or would tell stories about how Helen, I'm assuming that's Helen of Sparta or Helen of Troy, appearing to Homer in a dream and telling him to make a poem about the Trojan expedition. Of course, that's an allusion to the Trojan War that's mentioned in the Iliad. So, but anyway, this is just another account that gives an account of the historical existence of the Homeridae in ancient Greece. So now let's just read one last quote from the ancient Greek philosopher Plato. All right, so let's just read this one last quote from Plato, from the ancient Greek philosopher Plato. So at a slightly earlier date, Plato makes a similar comment. I believe that some of the Homeridae recite 2 hymns to Eros from among the esoteric poems. One of them is quite disrespectful to the god, and what's more, the meter is incorrect. This is what they sing. Now this winged god is called by mortals Eros, but mortals say Teros, because love must grow wings. So this is just another quote from another ancient Greek source, of course, the famous Plato. He states that the Homeridae recited 2 poems to the god Eros. So this is just yet more confirmation that the Homeridae were in fact a historical group of people that did in fact exist on the island of Chios. Okay, so now that we've been able to at the very least speculate where Homer came from and that he was most likely from the island of Chios, let's just take a look at who the original inhabitants of Chios were. All right, so now let's just take a look at who the original inhabitants of the island of Chios were. So now we're going to read this little Wikipedia entry right here. And I'm only going to read like the very first half of this sentence, or the very first part of this sentence, starting with Pherecydes. So Pherecydes, native to the Aegean, wrote that the island was occupied by the Leleges. So now I just want to stop right here at this name, Leleges, and I just want to give a brief background of who the Leleges were. So the Leleges were documented as being one of the very first inhabitants of the island of Chios, along with another Greek tribe known as the Pelasgians, who I will be speaking about when I talk about the ancient Greeks and when I do my independent series on the ancient Greeks and who they were and what they looked like. But anyway, the Leleges, they were an ancient Greek tribe who were said to be amongst one of the Aboriginal Greeks that settled in Greece, along with the Pelasgians and a few other tribes, and they are considered to be the ancestors of the Spartans and the Doric Greeks. Now, the Doric Greeks were a tribe or a group of people who were regarded as being one of the earlier settlers of Greece prior to the time period known as the classical Greek time period. Them along with 3 other tribes known as the Aeolians, the Achaeans, and the Ionians, they conquered Greece in and around, I believe, 1100 BC, and they became the dominant faction in Greece during that time period from about 1100 BC to, I want to say, like the end of the 4th century BC. They were the dominant faction in Greece. Okay, but once again, they're gonna be talked about in my series that I do on the ancient Greeks, my actual series on the ancient Greeks. Okay, so that will be for later. But the Spartans, along with the Dorians, as well as the Aeolians, the Achaeans, the Ionians, we're about to see what the Ionians look like in a little bit. But all those tribes were so-called black, and the Pelasgians as well. Those were so-called black people as well. The Pelasgians, they were the ancestors of the vast majority of the people of Greece that proceeded after them, which were pretty much, you know, all of the Greek tribes, since they were pretty much the first. The Pelasgians were pretty much the first tribe of people who settled in Greece. So they were the ancestors of all the other tribes that came after them or that proceeded after them. Okay, but once again, that'll be another story for another day. But let's just get another source that states, an ancient Greek source that states that the Leleges were in fact the first settlers of Chios. Alright, so now this is an excerpt from the Dictionary of Greek and Roman Geography written by William Smith, and it's going to give an account of who the first settlers of the island of Chios were. So now let's read this real quick. So the oldest inhabitants of the island were Pelasgi or Pelasgians, according to one tradition, and Strabo confirms in 621 of his geography. So Strabo, for those of you who don't know, is a very, very highly renowned and well-known ancient Greek geographer. Okay, well, let's just keep reading. So that the Chians considered the Pelasgi from Thessaly as their settlers, which, if it has any exact meaning, is a statement that they were descendants of Thessalian Pelasgi or Pelasgians. In another passage, page 632, he gives the statement of Pherecydes that Leleges originally possessed the Ionian coast of Ephesus as far as Phocaea, Chios, and Samos, by which is perhaps meant that Leleges occupied Chios, from which they were ejected by the Ions or the Ionians. Okay, so as we can see, the Pelasgians, they were regarded as the oldest inhabitants of Chios, and then subsequent to them came the Leleges, who I already stated were amongst the first people to inhabit Chios, and they possessed the territories that would eventually become known as the Ionian coast, which was, of course, later inhabited by the Ionians, who, once again, we're going to take a look and see what they looked like in a little bit. But now that we've established that the aboriginal people of Chios were the Pelasgians and the Leleges, let's take a look at another group of people that the Leleges were identified with, so that we can gain a better understanding as to what they looked like, due to there being very little actual depictions of the ancient Leleges, just like their counterparts, the Pelasgians. Okay, now there was a group of people who the ancient Leleges were said to have been identified with. These people were known as the Carians, or the Carians of southwest Anatolia or Turkey, and we're going to look at them in a little bit, but let's just confirm that the Leleges and the Carians were in fact the same people. So this is going to be an excerpt from the ancient Greek geographer and historian Strabo. This is an excerpt from his most famous work, known as the Geographica. But anyway, let's start from the top of this paragraph right here, where it says, "As for the Pelasgi." So as for the Pelasgi, I have already discussed them. As for the Leleges, some conjecture that they are the same as the Carians, and others that they were only fellow inhabitants and fellow soldiers of these. And this, they say, is why in the territory of Miletus certain settlements are settlements of the Leleges, and why in many places in Korea tombs of the Leleges and deserted forts known as Lelegian forts are so called. So what Strabo is basically trying to state right here is that there are a lot of landmarks or places in the area of Korea, which is where the Koreans dwelt, that have a lot of the old deserted forts and places of the Leleges. Okay, so the remnants of the existence of the Leleges existed in the areas where the Koreans dwelt, is basically what Strabo is trying to say right here. But anyway, however, the whole of what is now called Ionia used to be inhabited by Koreans and Leleges, but the Ionians themselves expelled them and took possession of the country, although in still earlier times the captors of Troy had driven the Leleges from the region about Ida, that is near Pedasus, and the Santanios River. Okay, so what Strabo is trying to say here, or what he's stating in this little excerpt that I just read here, is that the Koreans and the Leleges were said to be either the same people or fellow countrymen. Okay, but either way, they had a close association with one another. And the Leleges, if they were in fact intermixed with the Koreans, that would make a lot of sense, because the Leleges had a very, very extensive history of intermixing with other groups and with other tribes. And even Strabo attests to this through a citation that we're going to read in a minute from an ancient Greek poet by the name of Hesiod. Okay, so let's just take a look at that real quick. We're going to go down to number 3, where it says, "But in particular." So, "But in particular, one might believe Hesiod when he says concerning them, for verily Locris was chief of the peoples of the Leleges, whom once Zeus, the son of Cronus, who knoweth devices and imperishable, gave to the Diocalian peoples picked out of the earth. For by his etymology seems to me to hint from earliest times that they were a collection of mixed people, and that this was the tribe, and that this is why the tribe disappeared. and the same might be said of the Caucons, since now they are nowhere to be found, although in earlier times they were settled in several places. Okay, so once again, what Chabot is saying here is that the Leleges had a very, very extensive history of intermixing with other tribes and with other groups. Okay, so once again, they most likely, if they weren't the same as the Koreans, they were most likely very, very heavily mixed in with the Koreans. They intermixed very, very heavily with the Koreans. All right, so now let's just read one more source from another ancient Greek historian who identifies the Leleges with the Koreans. All right, so now let's read this excerpt from the legendary Greek historian Herodotus. So let's start from the top. So Harpagus, after subjugating Ionia, made an expedition against the Koreans, Caunians, and Lycians, taking Ionians and Aeolians with him. Of these, the Koreans have come to the mainland from the islands, for in the past they were islanders called Leleges, and under the rule of Minos, not as far as I can learn by report, paying tribute, but manning ships for him when he needed them. Okay, so as we can see right here, Herodotus states that the Koreans were known in the past as Leleges. Okay, so he even comes to the conclusion that the Koreans and the Leleges were basically the same people. Okay, so whether or not the Leleges were the same people or just heavily mixed with the Koreans, their connection with each other is undeniable. They have an inextricable link with one another, and it is probable that they were in fact the same people, just under different names. So the Leleges most likely later on became known as the Koreans. They just changed their name. So, but now that we've established that, let's take a look at some of the ancient depictions of the Koreans, so that we can once again gain a greater understanding of what the Leleges looked like. All right, so now this is a depiction of a Korean soldier. The picture is kind of faded, but if you can see, or if you look closely, you can see that the hair that they have for this Korean soldier has a very, very tight curl pattern. And in the ancient world, the very, very tight curl pattern would usually be used to indicate woolly hair. But I'm going to go more in depth into that when I show the depictions of the Ionians, the ancient depictions of the Ionians. So, but let's just move on and see another depiction of a Korean. All right, so this is another picture of a Korean soldier. And as we can see here, this picture is a little bit more blurry, but if you look close enough, you can still see the tight curl pattern that's in his hair. So once again, the tight curl pattern in the ancient world was usually used to indicate woolly hair, or so-called black hair. If you look closely, you can kind of see what looks like an afro coming out of the back of his headdress, right? So once again, in ancient sculptures and in ancient reliefs, kind of like this one, tight curl patterns will be used to depict quote-unquote black or woolly or even kinky hair. So, but once again, I'm going to show that even more, and I'm gonna even show examples of that when I show depictions of the Ionians a little bit later on in this video. But the Ionians, they had the same exact curl pattern in their hair, or they were depicted as having the same exact curl pattern in their hair as the ancient Koreans. All right, so now let's just look at one last depiction of a Korean. Okay, so now this is going to be the last depiction of a Korean that I show. And so this is a vase that was created during what was known as the Orientalizing period in ancient Greece. Okay, so Orientalizing or Orientalization was basically a phase in ancient Greek art and culture. And it was basically a revolutionary time in ancient Greek art and culture. Okay, so but the Koreans oftentimes in their vases that they would create during the Orientalizing period, they oftentimes would create vases that depicted animals that this so-called black person is holding in their hands right here. Okay, so that is an indicator that this most likely was in fact an authentic Korean that's depicted on this vase. Okay, so this is of course this is a so-called black person. And when you look at the description of this vase, like on Wikipedia, because you can find this this depiction of this man on this Korean vase on Wikipedia. It states in the description that the person on the vase looks like a quote-unquote African person. Okay, because once again, this is in fact a black person or a black man, or it could even be a black woman too, who knows. But this most likely, once again, is a Korean, or an authentic depiction of a Korean. Okay, so now that we've seen what the first settlers of the island of Chios looked like, once again, the Leleges were amongst the first settlers of Chios, along with the Pelasgians, who once again I will be talking about when I do my series on the ancient Greeks. But now that we've looked at them, let's take a look at the people who conquered the Koreans or the Leleges and became the main inhabitants of the island of Chios in and around the time period of Homer's existence and beyond. And of course, those people, the people that I'm talking about, are the Ionians. Let's take a look at them real quick. Alright, so now as I've already stated, the Ionians are going to be a completely different story for another day when I do my series on the ancient Greeks, all the way from the Bronze Age Greeks, so from about the time period of the Minoans and the Mycenaeans to the Hellenic Greeks, which of course the Ionians, they were Hellenic Greeks along with the Aeolians, the Achaeans, and the Dorians. Those were all Hellenic Greek tribes along with various other tribes that were considered quote-unquote Hellenic Greeks. Okay, but most of those tribes, most of the Hellenic Greek tribes and even the Bronze Age Greek tribes were so-called black people. Once again, that'll be another video for another day. But let's just take a look at a few depictions of the Ionians real quick. So this is a close-up of an Ionian man during the Ionian delegation to the Achaemenid King Darius the Great. This was during the time period of the Achaemenid Empire's subjugation of the Ionians and various other Greek tribes. And this was also around the time period of the Ionian Revolt as well, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, as we can see here, this Ionian man who's bearing the gift to King Darius the Great, he has what I already stated was the hair texture that's depicted in ancient sculptures and in ancient reliefs such as this one, where it depicts so-called woolly hair or even kinky hair as it's portrayed right here with this Ionian man who has the tight curl pattern in his hair. Okay, and once again, we're going to see some examples of other statues that depict so-called clearly that depicts so-called black people with this same curl pattern right here that this Ionian man has. Okay, but this is our first depiction of what an Ionian looked like. So let's look at another one real quick. So this is yet another depiction of an Ionian man. Once again, we can see the tight curl pattern in his hair coming out of the back of his headdress. And this looks a lot like what you would see from a black person, like who has like a cap or some sort of headdress on with their afro coming out of the back of the cap. Okay, that's what this looks like right here. So but let's look at one more depiction of an Ionian. All right, so this is the last depiction of an Ionian right here, and this is a little bit more blurry, but you can still see the hair coming out of the back of this person's headdress, and you can still see that tight curl pattern there. So let's just look at a few depictions of so-called black African looking sculptures that depict them with the same hair type as the Ionian soldiers that we've seen thus far. All right, so now this is an ancient sculpture right here with a quote-unquote black African man who has the same exact hair curl pattern as the Ionian soldiers that I showed. He has the same exact tight curl pattern as the Ionian soldiers who were or not the Ionian soldiers, but the Ionians who were giving those delegations to King Darius the Great. Okay, this person right here has the same exact tight curl pattern that I already stated was meant to indicate woolly hair back in the ancient world. Whenever you know, they would make sculptures or reliefs like the reliefs that we saw of the Ionians. Okay, so let's look at yet another sculpture that depicts a so-called black African person with this same hair type. So now this is a depiction of the Buddha. This is a statue of the Buddha, And there has been some controversy surrounding the ethnic origins of the Buddha and how he's depicted with the, as we can see, woolly hair. And some historians have even purported that Buddha was in fact of so-called black African origin. But that will be another story for another day when I do my series on the Buddha and the origins of the Buddha. But anyway, let's look at another depiction of the Buddha real quick. So this is yet another depiction of the Buddha, and as we can see, this sculpture right here has the tight curl pattern, and then you can even see that, of course, you got the nose that's chipped off right here, but this sculpture of the Buddha also has the prominent lips, the thick lips that oftentimes is that's characteristically seen with so-called black people. All right. Once again, there has been speculation around whether or not the entity known as Buddha was originally depicted as a quote-unquote African man or a so-called black African man, but that, once again, that'll be another story for another day. But we can still see that the Buddha right here has the tight curl pattern in its hair. This sculpture of the Buddha has the tight curl pattern in its hair, just like the depiction of the Ionians. All right, the Ionians who were giving those gifts to King Darius King Darius the Great. All right, so now let's just look at one last depiction of a sculpture that shows woolly hair. All right, so this last depiction shows a quote-unquote African man. This is kind of like a vase, a sculpture slash vase, and of course we can see once again the tight curl pattern in this person's hair. And when you look at depictions like this, normally what will be said is that this is a so-called African that the ancient Greeks oftentimes would create art or they would depict certain African figures on their coins, on the front of some of their coins that we're about to see in a minute. But this most likely right here is depicting an actual ancient Greek an ancient Greek native right here, because once again, the ancient Greeks, they were so-called black. But just getting back to what I stated about the hair, so yeah, we can see the curl pattern right here. You can see the little tight curls in this this section where it's kind of like yellowish. You can see the tight curl pattern in the hair, which once again indicates that this person is a so-called black person, just like the Ionians, the ancient depictions of the Ionians that I just showed. All right, so now that we've established what the Ionians looked like and that they were indeed so-called black, let's circle back around to the main topic of this video, that being Zeus and why he was referred to as Aethiops, or the black, by the people of Chios, who we just saw, from the Leleges to the Ionians, who were once again so-called black people, and were of course the main people of. They were some of the main groups of people who inhabited the island of Chios prior to the Macedonian takeover. All right, so now let's just transition over to the main topic of this video, that being Zeus and why he was called Aethiops. All right, so now let's finally get to the source of who it was that stated Zeus was given the epithet of Aethiops on the island of Chios. So this excerpt that we're going to take a look at is from the Hellenistic tragic poet Lycophron, who is going to mention a couple names that were given to Zeus by other inhabitants of other islands in Greece. And one of the names that he's going to mention will of course be Aethiops. So let's just read this excerpt real quick. So yet there is one, yea in beyond our hopes, to help a gracious God, called Drymenius, Prometheus, Aethiops, Gyrapsius, who when the roaming luster they receive. So in this little excerpt, we can see that we can see various names that are being listed by Lycophron that denote a certain deity he's praising. Two of the names that he lists are Drymenius and Prometheus, and these were two names that Zeus was referred to on the island of Pamphylia, which is a region south of Asia Minor. And then we see two more names in Gyrapsius, an epithet he was known under on the island of Chios. And then, of course, we see Aethiops as well. All of these names were just different titles that Zeus was known as by the people who inhabited these islands. But what's unique about Aethiops is it's the only name out of all these other names or what they call quote-unquote cult names that denotes color. The term Aethiops, when applied to Zeus, also could be translated as black or the black. And we're about to see why that is in a minute. But let's just confirm that Zeus was indeed referred to as Aethiops on the island of Chios. Alright, so now let's first take a look at this definition of the term Aethiops as it was interpreted by the English lexicographer by the name of William Smith, who was known for his advancements in teaching the Greek and Latin language. So he's definitely a reliable source on the matter, or he's a reliable authority on the matter. So now let's just read his definition of what the term Aethiops meant. So now, Aethiops, the glowing or the black, a surname of Zeus under which he was worshipped in the island of Chios. And then he goes about citing Lycaphron. Okay, so as we can clearly see, Mr. William Smith identified the name of Aethiops as it was applied to Zeus to be a surname for him on the island of Chios, like I already stated. But let's see one more source to even further confirm that Zeus was indeed called Aethiops on Chios. So now this next definition is from the British archaeologist Arthur Bernard Cook. So let's see what he has to say about Zeus being called Aethiops. So, but if it must be admitted that the Greeks did not directly identify Zeus, their sky god, with the sun, it can hardly be denied that indirectly Zeus was connected with solar phenomena. Some of his cult epithets are suggestive of such a connection. Thus, at Chios, Zeus was entitled Aethiops, he of the burning face. Okay, so now I just want to pause here for a second, because this right here where it says he of the burning face is going to be seen a lot when we define what the term Aethiops meant. And this is important to note because it acts as confirmation that Zeus was indeed given this surname of Aethiops by the people of Chios because they saw him as a so-called black man. And this is because the ancient Greeks, when they applied this term to the people who it normally was in reference to, that being the African nations, they used the term Aethiops to mean burnt face, due to their faces being darkened by the rays of the sun, which is what gave them their black skin color. But the term Aethiops, actually, contrary to popular opinion, was not just limited to the peoples of Africa, but rather to pretty much all darker skinned peoples. They would often be called Aethiops along with other names like Melos, or Melancrois, or Melancrus, but that'll be something for another day. But even this archaeologist alludes to the fact that Aethiops didn't just apply to the people of Africa, because he states right here, a name elsewhere given to a son of Hephaestus, eponym of Ethiopia, and to one of the horses of the sun. So for those of you who don't know, Hephaestus was a son of Zeus and Hera. Okay, and so basically this term Aethiops, as it's applied to Hephaestus' son, was applied to one of the grandsons of Zeus, because once again Hephaestus was a son of Zeus, and so Hephaestus' son being called Aethiops would make the son who was referred to as Aethiops a grandson of Zeus. Okay, and then even another grandson of Zeus that went by the name of Pelops, his name had a close affinity to the word Aethiops as well. And his name quite literally, and you guys can go and look this up, but his name quite literally meant blackface. Okay, but that will be another story for another day when I once again do my independent series on the ancient Greeks, because Pelops acts as even more confirmation that the first settlers of ancient Greece, particularly the area in Greece known as the Peloponnese that was settled by the Mycenaeans, were so-called black. Okay, because the Peloponnesian Peninsula, as it's also called, gets its name from Pelops, and it quite literally means the island of Pelops. And once again, Pelops' name meant blackface. Okay, but anyway, we see yet another scholar who confirms that Zeus was indeed referred to as Aethiops on the island of Chios. So now let's move on and define what the term Aethiops meant, so that we can get a better understanding of why Zeus was given this name and why it translates to the black. Alright, so now let's just read this definition of what the term Aethiops means right here. So when we look at this definition, we can see here that it states Jupiter was given this name on Chios. And for those of you who don't know, Jupiter was just another identification of Zeus by the Romans, who would have their gods be represented by the planetary bodies. So like, for example, Zeus was Jupiter, Mercury was Hermes, Mars I believe was Ares, Pluto was Hades, and then Neptune was Poseidon, and then so on and so forth. So the point is that Jupiter is basically just another name for Zeus, and then it states that Aethiops was a son of Vulcan. Once again, that's yet another name for Hephaestus that was given to him by the Romans, who I already mentioned had a son named Aethiops. Hephaestus had a son named Aethiops. Okay, and then when we move on, it states that it was a synonym. The term Aethiops was a synonym to the ancient Latin word niger, which I've already stated a numerous amount of times on this channel, was just an ancient way of saying Negro, or even the N word. Okay, and then subsequent to this, it states Aethiops was applied to men of dark complexion wherever situated. So once again, the term Aethiops was used for just about any other so-called darker skinned person. Okay, and not just Africans. Again, case in point, Zeus and his surname of Aethiops. And then lastly, it states that they derived their black complexion from Phaethon, who, for those of you who don't know, was the son of Helios. So and Helios was the sun god. So this basically is stating that their dark complexion or black complexion was derived from exposure to the sun, like I already stated a little bit ago. All right, so now let's move on to the next definition real quick. All right, now let's read this next definition of the term Aethiops. So as we can see in the beginning, when we look at this definition, it states that the Greeks applied the term Aethiops to anything that had a dark or swarthy color. But once again, it can also apply to people as well. So any person that has a quote-unquote dark or swarthy color could have that name Aethiops applied to them. And then we see that the author goes about equating the term Aethiops with words like Negro and Nigritia. And Nigritia is just another term for the western area of Africa. But once again, we see Aethiops being just juxtaposed to Negro. So now let's move on. Alright, so now with this definition, we can see that the term Aethiops is written in the original Greek lettering, and we see that Negro is once again highlighted as being another word or definition for Aethiops. But then when we also see the word burnt-faced as being an equivalent definition of the word Aethiops, that goes back to what I stated, or the citation that I gave from the British archaeologist Arthur Cook, when he stated that the name Aethiops that was given to Zeus meant he of the burning face. And in this definition, it states that Aethiops means burnt face. So once again, that acts as even more confirmation that Zeus was indeed called Aethiops due to him being of a black complexion. All right. So now we see again that the term Aethiops means burnt face as well as Negro. Okay. So this is what Zeus was called, people. I'm not making any of this up. Zeus was for real basically called Negro by the people of the island, on the island of Chios. And what you'll notice when you do research on this name that was applied to Zeus is it's not that easy to find information on this word and how it was applied to Zeus back in the ancient world, which should let a lot of you guys know, especially so-called black people, that they do not want this stuff to get out. They don't want us to know that the ancient Greek gods were originally so-called black, because by osmosis that would mean that the ancient Greeks themselves had to have been so-called black too. And you know, with the Caucasian, everything of note that has any sort of value in history has to be attributed to them, because they control the historical records and narrative, and they will never teach so-called black people this stuff in conventional school settings. So that's why it is up to us to educate ourselves on these things. All right, but as we can see, and as I've been able to prove, Zeus was indeed referred to as Aethiops, and the term Aethiops was in fact a word that meant a black or negroid person. All right, so circling back to Homer and the original proposition I made earlier in this video of whether or not the portrayal of Zeus in the show Troy Fall of a City was an accurate depiction of the Zeus that Homer most likely venerated and included in his Iliad, I've been able to, at the very least, somewhat prove that Homer did in fact derive from Chios, even though once again it is not definitive where Homer's birthplace was. But the best evidence that we can glean from is that he was from the island of Chios. And we've already seen that the Chians, or the people of Chios, according to Lycophron, did in fact worship Zeus under the epithet of Aethiops. So it is feasible to at the very least state that this was the Zeus that Homer included in his Iliad. But just like with just about everything else having to do with Homer, this is not for certain. Okay, but the reason why I wanted to make this video is because, number one, This is a very interesting topic to me that I will be delving into when I do my actual series on the ancient Greeks and how they depicted their gods, who were once again originally black people. All right, but also it leads into the final installment of this series that will be on one of the many sons that Zeus had that was that was said to be a forefather of various dark-skinned nations. Once again, Zeus's grandson Pelops was the forefather basically of the Mycenaeans, or of the Mycenaeans that ended up settling on Pelops Island. All right, so but he, along with other descendants of Zeus, such as the son of Zeus by the name of Epiphus or Apis, who was the son of Zeus and the mortal Io, and Epiphus was a king of Egypt and was even said to be the founder of the capital of ancient Egypt, not the modern Egyptian capital, which is Cairo, but ancient Egyptian's capital of Memphis, through the marriage of his wife Memphis. His wife's name was Memphis, and they together made a daughter, or created a daughter by the name of Libya. And of course, for those of you who know what that name means, you'll understand it to be the region in North Africa that was used by the Romans and Greeks to denote the whole region or a landmass of North Africa in general. But this was also the place where the people known as the Berbers who came from, and to some people they are better known as the Moors. All right, now there is a lot of controversy over what the original Moors looked like, and some people claim they looked like the people who inhabit the vast majority of the region of North Africa today. Some people state that they were so-called Caucasians with blonde hair and blue eyes, and then others, of course, assert that they were so-called black. All right, but this topic will be addressed when I do my independent series on the Moors, and even briefly in this video, or in the video about Epiphus, who once again was the forefather of the Libyans, who were anciently referred to as the Dark Libyans. So just keep that in mind. But lastly, the video on Epiphus will also lead into my next video series about the ancient Egyptians, who were indeed so-called black Africans.